Hey guys, what's up? I'm Phoenix Prime, and today, instead of working on a comic dub, I'm going to be doing something a little different. And by a little, I actually mean a lot, which is quite a difference. But anyway, instead of presenting a comic dub like I normally do, I'm going to be talking about something personal. And believe it or not, it relates to the Handplates comic we've all grown to know and love. By now we know that a lot of people have dubbed the comic on YouTube, like Starbot, Vade, Nintendo Boomer, Jamaica Jamaica, and at least a dozen others. Plus there have also been some French and Russian dubs here and there. And for those of you who have stuck around on this channel long enough, you know that both Ender King Dubs and I have been dubbing it together for quite some time now. Honestly, it's been a fun journey so far. There's been a lot of angst, lots of twists and turns. It's been an emotional roller coaster overall. But aside from that crazy ride, it helped build up this channel and bring a lot of Undertale fans together. And that makes me happy more than anything else. More recently, however, I've come to realize something. Handplates actually connects to a lot of relationships and other things that can happen in real life. I know it's probably obvious at this point, not to mention some of you probably beat me to it by now, but as a slower thinker, and as someone who was able to observe the comic more closely, I was able to put the pieces together and make the connections. That, and I also discovered that some of the things that happens in Handplates actually connects to certain things that happened in my life. So, by now, you all know the main story that's happened in Handplates so far. Dr. Wingdings Gaster is the royal scientist who has one mission, to save Asgore and find an alternative to destroy the barrier that keeps the monsters trapped underground. In doing so, Gaster creates sands of Papyrus, to use them as experiments, and all sorts of abuse and hell transpires between them, with Sands of Papyrus being on the receiving end of things. It all ends after a while when Sans pushes Gaster into the core, erasing him from existence. That's how Sans and Papyrus end up with Asgore, how Asgore teaches them the basics of life and how to stand on their own 2 feet, and the rest is basically history. But Phoenix, you're probably wondering, how do you relate to this comic? Well, I'll explain myself, and I'll use a bunch of analogies in order to elaborate. Because, believe it or not, the interactions between some of the characters in the comic actually symbolize some relationships and events that took place in my past. And it's because of this connection that my love for Handplates not only grew, but my understanding of certain things in life also improved. By far. To tell my story, I'm going to rewind a bit and go back to some of my childhood days, so do pardon me because this might take a while. A long time ago, back in the early 2000s, I was just a young kid attending grade school with my friends. You know, like any average kid would. My parents divorced when I was around 4 or 5, and my little brother at the time was around 1 or 2. I actually don't remember the time when my parents split, but from what I was told, I didn't handle it very well. So, I guess you can say it was a bit similar to when Toriel and Asgore split up in Undertale. And it's kind of funny because back then, they were kind of like Toriel and Asgore. My mother was compassionate and protective over me and my brother, and she also cared about our education. My father, D we'll call him, was also fun to be with, cracking jokes and letting us listen to our favorite movie soundtracks on the radio. For a few years after Mom and D split, everything was fine. Nothing close to perfect, sure, but for me, in my eyes as a little girl, everything was fine. My brother, Hintolime, and I went back and forth between both parents due to the custody agreement, but we didn't have any complaints about that. We had a good relationship with both parents, and both parents were actually on friendly terms with each other, despite the divorce that had happened. So, I guess you can say that was probably what life would have been like for Chara and Azriel if they had been around when Toriel and Asgore split up. Although, Hintolime and I were actually more like Papyrus back then. We were both optimistic and energetic, yet stubborn and naive, which actually led to us getting into fights every now and then. Then again, I'm sure we've all had days where we fought with our younger siblings. I'm sure we can all relate on that note. Anyways, years passed and my brother and I were attending the same elementary school. By that point, as far as I was concerned, everything was still the same, and I didn't have any complaints about what went on under both parents' roofs. All I really knew at the time was that I was surrounded by friends and loved ones. Seems perfect, right? Wrong. Because, well, that was when I met the woman who'd later become my stepmother. To avoid naming names, we'll call her Elle. D met Elle when I was in the 3rd grade, and Hintolime was probably entering kindergarten at that point. When Hintolime and I first met Elle, she seemed like she was a nice person. Initially, she seemed like someone who was cool to hang out with, and D appeared to be happy around her. We also learned that Elle had a daughter, E, who would eventually become my stepsister. The way things started out, Elle and E would come over and have sleepovers at our place, and we sometimes slept over at their place in turn. It was kind of a back and forth sort of thing. But as Elle stayed around more often, Hinterlime and I quickly learned that things weren't exactly turning out the way we thought they would. Once she had walked into our lives, and once it became evident that Dee and Elle were in a relationship, Hinterlime and I learned that Elle wasn't always that cool person we thought she was on the surface. Believe it or not, she actually turned out to be more of a WD Gaster. Strict, always by the book when it came to house rules, self-centered, and didn't always come off as genuine and sincere. It didn't take long for Hinterlime and I to realize that, in a way, we were in trouble. Hanging out with E didn't make things much better. She was like Elle, but to a lesser and more tolerable degree. But I won't lie when I say she was a bit spoiled, not to mention she had a tendency to make fun of me and Hinterlime from time to time, even making us believe in scary monsters that didn't exist. It's silly and embarrassing when I think about it, but it was honestly nothing compared to the stuff that came next. As Dee and Elle stayed together and started living together officially, Dee started acting less and less like himself. He only seemed to be himself whenever he was around me and Hinterlime, but with Elle, it was another story. He seemed to be a bit robotic, more serious, and started to pay attention to her interests more often. Dee started acting like Elle, but at first it wasn't nearly as bad. Even so, Hinterlime and I tried to talk about it with him, expressing our discomfort and how unhappy we were becoming. But nothing we said actually changed anything. Whether he ignored everything because of our young age, or because he just cared about his own interests, I don't know. Either way, no matter what we said, everything was changing. Then Dee and Elle got engaged, and Elle gave birth to 2 kids who became our half-siblings. At first I didn't really think about it, because the idea of being a new big sister was exciting. However, as Dee and Elle started living together permanently in a whole new residence, the happy feelings quickly diminished. The custody also changed between Dee and my mom, so that Hinterlime and I would be with one parent during one week, and with the other during the next week, and so on and so forth. So it was a week-on, week-off schedule. Hinterlime and I didn't like this at all. This meant spending more time with not just Dee, but our stepmother as well. Like Sans and Papyrus, Hinterlime and I were trapped. We couldn't change the custody schedule, and we definitely couldn't avoid Elle no matter how hard we tried. To make things worse, Dee wasn't the same person as he was prior to when he met Elle. So instead of being like Asgore, as he was in the very beginning, Dee slowly, surely, and inevitably became another WD Gaster. Both Dee and Elle were strict and by the book, not to mention they put an awful lot of pressure on us when it came to studying, getting good grades, being obedient, and so on. They put so much pressure on me and Hinterlime, we were both legitimately terrified of making mistakes and screwing up. It was as if setting one toe out of line was bad enough to trip an alarm. It was so bad I always cried on the Fridays when I had to go back to Dee and Elle's house, for the fear of always getting into trouble for the teeniest of mistakes. Needless to say, our relationships were going downhill. They started off as good, but as the years passed, they went from good to mediocre, to bad, to worse. At this point, you've probably already put the pieces together, but I'll say it anyway. There was a lot of emotional and psychological abuse that happened between us. It happened to Hinterlime and me, just as it happened when Sans and Papyrus were under the care of Gaster. There were a couple of moments of physical abuse that happened between Hinterlime and a certain other on Elle's side of the family, but for the sake of Hinterlime's privacy and personal safety, I won't disclose that information in this video. Often, between me and Elle, and Hinterlime and Elle, there was a lot of belittling. Whenever we were given a task around the house, or if we were just simply doing homework, Elle would always find an error to point out and make us feel bad about. Like, if we were given a chore to clean the kitchen after dinner, she'd always point out a dirty spot that we legitimately missed, thus giving us more work to do and making us feel like we weren't working hard enough to begin with. If we made any sort of mistake, like accidentally leaving a sneaker out on the mudroom floor, forgetting to talk about school grades, or even taking a glimpse at the television before going out for exercise, she would blow her stack. We just had to be obedient. We just had to be perfect. We just had to live with a family system that was just outright reprogramming us. I frequently looked back at the relationship between Elle and E whenever Hinterlime and I were around. If E or our half-siblings messed up somewhere, Elle didn't give them grief about their flaws. At least, not nearly as much as she did whenever Hinterlime and I messed something up. Whether this was because we weren't Elle's biological children, or because she just didn't trust us, I don't know. But both of those things were most likely the main reasons why our relationship was so complicated. I guess you can say she was also like WD Gaster in that sense, considering how Gaster always behaved differently whenever he was around Asgore and Alphys, and Sans and Papyrus. For lack of better words, that sucked. D wasn't much help either. Hinterlime and I continued trying to talk to him about how unhappy we were with L. Hinterlime became more like Sans over time, because he took things more seriously and just started to roll with whatever was happening, despite how it was clear he was unhappy. I became like a cross between Sans and Papyrus. I took things seriously, I was aware of what was going on, and yet I often tried to reach out to D and his good side. Actually, Hinterlime and I both acted like Papyrus whenever he tried to reach out to Gaster. We both tried to reach his good side, and we both wanted to try and get the old dad back. But nothing we said or did worked. For D, our words just went in one ear and out the other. Everything just stayed the same no matter what Hinterlime and I did. Like Gaster, D completely neglected our thoughts and feelings about the situation. When I expressed my disdain about living with him and how I hated this place sometimes, he just shouted in my face, sarcastically said he was sorry about how I hated it, and then sent me to my room. Then one day, while D was driving us home from school, Hinterlime expressed his feelings and went so far as to calling the house a prison. When that happened, D just snapped, pulled over while we were on the highway, told my brother to get out of the car, and then proceeded to shout in his face. He called him a fucking piece of shit, and shouted things along the lines of, "How dare you call our home a prison? If you keep complaining like that, I'll make sure that you feel like you're living in a prison." That traumatized my brother for years afterwards, and I, being a witness of the whole thing, had been too scared to do anything. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and needless to say, my brother never said anything like that again. My mom knew what was going on, and she knew right off the bat that we didn't like L. She knew that Hinterlime and I weren't happy, and that we were always frightened of going back, because we didn't want to be constantly rebuked and belittled for our flaws. So of course, Hinterlime and I were always overjoyed to come home every other week, and dispirited every time we had to leave. It was because of our unhappiness that she went to court for us for a custody battle. A custody battle that would go on for literal years because D and L kept putting up a fight. More years passed, and I started high school while Hinterlime began his 3 years in middle school. If anything, I feel like the belittling got worse over time, and I was having a hard time recognizing D anymore. And yet, like Papyrus, I still kept reaching out to him with the hopes to miraculously reach his good side. Hinterlime became more of a Sans by then, and guarded his emotions a lot more often than I did. As for me, I just didn't have it in me to let go. Even when L greeted me with fake smiles and made me feel inferior compared to my other siblings, I still didn't have it in me to give up. After all, the dad I knew when I was 5 had to be in there somewhere, right? Wrong again. By that time, it seemed as if he had been 90% reprogrammed, and only a slim 10% of his old self remained. Both D and L continued putting pressure on me about my studies, the worst of it happening in 10th grade, when I was struggling with geometry and biology. Again, I was met with fake smiles, and the fact that they constantly pointed out my mistakes made me feel more and more like a failure. E and my half-siblings were praised for their successes while I was trapped. So was Hinterlime. In fact, there was a point in time where we couldn't attend after-school programs because D claimed our schedule wouldn't coincide very well with his working schedule. So the fact that I couldn't have a social life while under their care made me feel even more trapped. It didn't help that we had moved yet again to a location that was pretty much in the boondocks. That just didn't make things better. As I continued to live with D and L, I just shut down inside. It seemed like giving up and doing exactly as I was told was the only way to operate. Every time Hinterlime and I stayed with them, we were constantly treading on eggshells, and were practically becoming what they were to us. Perfectionists. If we did something right, we were fine. One false move under circumstances that were beyond our control, and it spelt trouble for us. And the feeling of being trapped would be emphasized even more. I was even treated like the younger sibling of the family, despite being D's firstborn child. In fact, it was E who was treated like the mature one, treated like the older one. She was the shining star, whereas I was a nobody. I slowly gained a talent for writing and voice acting in my spare time, but compared to the fact that E got to have lead roles in a drama club production, it was nothing. In the end, the things that I did meant nothing to them. And despite all of this, D still did nothing. He just seemed indifferent to it all and had this idea in his head that everything in his own little world was perfect. Whenever Elle lectured me or Hinterlime about something we did wrong, Dee would just sit there and hardly say a word, only speaking up when it was necessary and whenever it was for Elle's benefit. Like, it was obvious that he just didn't care about what we thought. It was clear that he had chosen his relationship with Elle over his relationship with me and my brother, and he had chosen that relationship a long time ago. Eventually, after a while, the tables finally began to turn in our favor. In November of 2014, Mom got full custody over me and my brother, which meant that we never had to go back. It was one of the happiest days of our lives, and we felt such relief. Mom wouldn't have to see us leave again, and Hinterlime and I were free to see our friends and go out to after-school programs more often. I guess, in a way, it was similar to what happened when Sans and Papyrus were taken in by Asgore. It felt so relieving, and the pressure, the addicting need to be a perfectionist for the sake of someone else, was washed away. Mostly. It wasn't all sunshine and daisies after that day. There were still some after effects. Once Mom got full custody over us, she saw that Hinterlime and I were depressed from the time we had spent with Dee and Elle, and other people in our family saw it too. In my case, I was still treading on eggshells and around people, and verbal communication had become a big issue. I even started having a form of PTSD from the emotional abuse I had from spending time with Dee and Elle. I had this idea stuck in my head that my voice didn't matter, that nothing I said or did would change anything. I was too scared to speak up for myself if I wanted something, and I felt that asking for help was childish. I even had breakdowns, becoming extremely defensive whenever I thought I was being criticized or judged. Remember that moment in Handplates when Sans was playing with Papyrus's Rubik's Cube, and how Papyrus got upset over it, even more so when Sans rearranged it for him? It was like that. In fact, the following dialogue was extremely similar to some of the interactions I had with my brother and my family.
I'm not stupid!
I didn't say you were.
I'm not stupid! I'm not stupid! My puzzles are really good! They're really challenging and smart and good!
Well, don't I always say that? Look, don't let him get to you, okay? We both know you're not dumb.
Dee and Elle never specifically said anything about me and Hinterlime being dumb or stupid, but their attitudes and the way they treated us told me more than I needed to know. Hence the reason I kept freaking out whenever I did. Mom recommended that I get some help, that I talk to somebody about this. At first I said no, since I was in complete denial at the time. But 2 years later, I realized I wasn't getting any better. So I started to seek out help. I started talking to some therapists to deal with both my PTSD and my communication skills. With a lot of time and patience and learning, I got better. I was able to heal. Like how Sans and Papyrus were able to get help from Asgore and heal from their experiences in the True Lab, Hinterlime and I were able to heal from some of our experiences with Dee and Elle. As for the relationship Hinterlime and I had with Dee and Elle, it really started to deteriorate. After Mom got full custody over us, Dee stopped calling us and sending messages anymore. There were 3 final straws that ultimately led to us not communicating anymore. The first straw was when my grandmother passed away in February of 2016. My brother and I were attending the 2 wakes the family had arranged for her. Literally 5 minutes before we left for the second wake, I was met with the news that Elle was pregnant again, and she was 6 months pregnant at the time I first heard the news. I was shocked, not to mention it only added to my grief I had over my grandmother. Like, why did you wait so long to tell me I was going to have another half-sister? If my relationship really mattered to you, why didn't you tell me and my brother? I felt sick and betrayed, not to mention angry. Fortunately, my 2 uncles and aunt, who were aware of the situation, actually helped me leave the house and get into the train station shortly before my stepmother showed up. To this day, I'm still thankful for them for what they did for me. The second straw happened in July, just a few months later. By that time, the baby was already born. Hinterlime and I had gone out to their place to visit, and this was during a time when we still wanted to give our relationship with Dee a chance. But when my brother and I had gotten there, Elle just sat there, holding the baby, the same baby she had been pregnant with months earlier, glaring at me. For at least 90% of the visit, she gave me and my brother the silent treatment. Her expression was, at times, indescribable, much like Gaster's was whenever he interacted with the other characters in Handplates. It frightened me a little, and gave me a feeling of being unwelcome and unwanted. I was actually pretty happy to leave when I had to take Hintoline to work that day, and believe it or not, that was the last time I saw my stepmother. The third and final straw happened in early 2017. One day in January, Dee had texted me and asked if we could get together sometime, for a lunch or a movie. Back then, I was happy to hear from him and said yes. He told me he'd get back to me within a few days. But a few days later, nothing happened. I kept waiting and waiting, just hoping he'd call or text back like he said he would. Now, I don't know if he was all caught up in work or if he was just preoccupied with other things that were going on in his life, but he didn't get back to me. I don't know what happened, but the more I waited for him to call, the angrier and the more irritable I got. I even took some of that frustration out on my parents and my brother. A month later, I talked with him about the problem, and that was when I let it all out. I cried. Over and over, I cried and told them how sorry I was for taking my anger out on them when they didn't deserve it. And just like that, they forgave me, and everything was all right between us. Those were the 3 straws that really led to my relationship with Dee crumbling. The same applied to Hintoline a short time later due to similar issues. Nowadays, we don't speak to each other anymore. We actually did speak to each other at one point in October of last year, but other than that, it's been silence all around. So I guess, in a sense, this was like when Sans pushed Gaster into the core. Just like Gaster, Dee just stopped existing and being a part of my life. Our relationship crumbled and was practically reduced to non-existence. And just like that, it all stopped. And I bet you noticed that I didn't once call my biological father Dad. You can probably see why. It's been a while since all that happened. To this day, I find myself still thinking about these things, and the little girl inside me is still coming to terms with what happened. But you know what? I'm okay. I'm a better, happier, and healthier person than I was 4-something years ago. And the same thing applies to Hintoline and my parents. My brother, he'll be graduating from high school this summer. Plus he's got a girlfriend, and he's been accepted into one of the colleges of his dreams. I couldn't be more proud of him than I am now. My mom, she remarried a few years ago to a man who's an amazing father and awesome friend for me. And they have both taught me that the world is an oyster and has many doors that can be opened as long as you have the key. Without their support, I'm pretty sure I'd be a bit of a different person right now. They have both been extremely supportive of me and my brother over the years, and I have nothing but love and respect for both of them. As for me, well, I've really learned a lot over the years. I've learned to love myself for who I am, and I'm always surrounded by people, friends and family alike, who support me and love me no matter what. I've also embraced the fact that nothing and no one in this world is perfect. In the end, we're all human, and we all make mistakes. And you know what? That's okay. It's just part of who we are. We just have to learn to accept that and accept our flaws. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm accepting the reality instead of shutting it out. I'm also pleased to announce that in a little more than a month, I'll be graduating from college with a degree in English and theater. I'm not entirely sure where I'll go afterwards, but all I know is things are definitely looking up and changing for the better. I have high hopes for the future, and I'm more than determined and ready to face it. I don't hate Handplates for relating to my life the way it does. In fact, if anything, I love it even more. I'm happy someone as talented as Zarla created the comic. I'm happy that it's brought people in the Undertale community together, and I'm happy to have the privilege of dubbing the comic itself. This is what makes the Handplate story all the more real and important to me, and I'm grateful for that more than anything else. I'm not talking about all of this to gain sympathy or even to gain subscribers. I just want to share this story and open up to other people, maybe even help them understand me a little more. And who knows? Maybe you have a story to share too. So if you have a story that you'd like to share, by all means, write it down in the comments below. When the right people see it, they'll definitely give you their love and support. I'm sure of it. And hey, I want to give some advice before this video ends, so just listen. If you find yourself with someone, whether it be a parent, a friend, or so on, who makes you feel like your voice doesn't mean anything, then know this. Your voice does matter, and you will always matter. You are not a nobody. You are somebody. You're not perfect, but you're beautiful and amazing in your own way. You'll have days where you stumble and fall, but as long as you speak up and ask for help, help will always come and get you back on your feet. And one last thing. If you're hurting about something that's happened in the past, don't keep it to yourself. At least, not forever. Believe it or not, talking about the problems you have really does make a difference. Don't ever be afraid to speak up. Talk to a parent, a close friend, a therapist, anyone you know you can fall back on, and anyone you know who loves and supports you. Trust me, you are loved. You are cherished. You have people out there who care about you. You really do matter, even when you have days where you don't feel like it. And if you're still struggling, then hear me out. I support you. I believe in you. And I love you. I love you. Thank you for taking this time to watch and listen, and as always, I appreciate your support and feedback. Stay tuned and keep your eyes open for more content that's to come on this channel, and I assure you that you won't be disappointed for what comes next. This is your friendly neighborhood Phoenix Prime, signing off and rolling out. And remember everybody, keep your chin up, keep moving forward, and keep dreaming. I'll see you soon.